the conversation. The event will last for around 1 hour and we'll have a Q&A to follow. So the event is a place for listening and learning and for conversation, and we welcome comments in the chat. So that everyone can feel safe in taking part, we would ask you to be considerate of your fellow audience members and panellists. Please do keep your comments polite. We stand by the trans community and are not here to debate trans lives. The event will be recorded and shared online, probably by the end of early next week, as we need to correct the auto-generated captions. Okay, so welcome to the Pitt Rivers Museum, and as I have said, my name is Josie and I work for the museum, and I'm also part of the National Lottery Heritage Funded Beyond the Binary project. As well as being part of the Beyond the Binary project, tonight's event is also part of our Radical Hope Looking Beyond the Museum series, and this evening we'll be discussing disability, access and the LGBTIAQ+ community and their experiences in heritage spaces. Radical Hope events aim to explore contemporary changes in museums and to reimagine museum practice. They focus on how Western museums have relied on colonial ideas that have hidden or erased many stories and ways of knowing in favour of promoting one viewpoint. The Reimagined Museum should be a place that supports all people to share their ways of knowing and tell their stories through their own voices. This series is led primarily by researchers and global community partners from around the world and unpicks colonial practices. These events are funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and taught the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities. And the Beyond the Binary project puts LGBTIAQ+ stories told by LGBTIAQ+ people at the heart of the museum, from its public galleries to its digital databases and events. We celebrate the strength and agency of queer communities and support individuals and groups in challenging societal binaries around gender, sexuality and power dynamics. Beyond the Binary contests any notion that the LGBTIAQ+ community and lives are a Western invention, a new trend, or that queer people do not have history. You can read more about Radical Hope and Beyond the Binary on the museum's website, and also come to see the project exhibition from the 1st of June. So that's definitely enough for me, and I'm going to hand over to Mara Gold, who will introduce this evening's amazing panel.
Thank you, Josie, and thank you everyone for coming. Welcome. I really just wanted to kind of have this conversation, one, for us to kind of showcase some work that's being done in the area of kind of disability and LGBTQ communities within arts and heritage spaces, but also so that we could perhaps all have a conversation and we can, go back to our own institutions or studies or, whatever it is you do, and sort of take some of these issues and solutions that we hopefully can go through this evening. I just want to announce for the Beyond the Binary exhibition, we are having a few kind of accessible tours and things going on. I won't just read out all the dates to you. I'll put the link in the chat in a second, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we will be doing audio described tours, which will include an object handling session within that tour. We'll be doing BSL tours, which will kind of include an exclusive insight into the behind the scenes from me, the Beyond the Binary researcher. And we'll also be doing quiet hours, which hopefully will have kind of dimmed lights and fewer people, obviously, although there's not many people in the spaces at the moment because of, you know what. But we'll also and have a kind of little breakout room in case anybody needs kind of that space away from the exhibition. So now that I've gone through that, I would love to introduce our wonderful panelists this evening. I'm just going to tell you quickly how the time is going to be divided up. So first of all, our panelists are going to kind of introduce themselves and their work for about 5 minutes each. I'll talk for a few minutes, so that will take around kind of just under 20 minutes. Then we'll have a discussion between the panelists for about 40 minutes. I'll be chairing, but I'll kind of come in with some of my own experiences as well. And then we'll have sort of 20 minutes at the end for Q&A, and we'll make sure we'll put all the links in again into the chat in case anyone gets disconnected or missed those. So we would love to see you at some of those events as well. But anyway, on to this evening. I'd love to introduce, so we have Martin York, Richard Sandell and Lady Kit. And then we're going to be starting with Martin this evening. So take it away when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mara, and hello from Manchester, the home of liquid sunshine. Although I have to say today it's actually really sunny, so that makes a nice change. A little bit I want to share about me. I'm very passionate about equality, and I believe that identity, culture and heritage are all key aspects of what make us who we are. We should never have to put unnecessary effort into hiding or suppressing these unique qualities in order to conform to majority group norms and pressure, because it's tiring, it's stressful, and it grinds people down. And richness of diversity of thought and action really helps us all to grow and to be better people. And representation in its forms, the different forms that it takes, is so important in supporting this, because it gives us a collective voice. We're seen and we're heard, and difference becomes normalized and respected and welcomed. And within minority groups, and indeed groups within groups, we have powerful stories to tell and histories to share. And although I'm a relative outsider in the panel today, I strongly believe that the cultural sector plays a significant part in this by helping to push boundaries and challenge preconceptions and assumptions. In terms of disability, it was something in my own family that I saw as part and parcel of being a nurturing and loving environment. So it was very much not unusual for me, and difference itself was welcomed. As I grew into the gay man that I am now, I've been very grateful for that positive approach in my upbringing and the freedom to be me. But I know that others don't have things as easy. I get frustrated by the increase in haves and have-nots and the inequality that I see in society. And I've seen friends and loved ones over the years be treated with hostility, rejection, contempt, and far worse. So although I'm no stranger to homophobia, I know that I'm fortunate that I have a number of positions and power and privilege that insulate me from the ugly underbelly of society. I'm white, as you see, I'm male, I'm physically big. I choose in most situations whether or not to disclose my sexuality or talk about my mental health. So thinking about all of those things, I seek to make a conscious effort to actively address the imbalance that I see, and to use my platforms to make space for others' voices to be heard and their opinions to be valued. And I know that there's always room at the table for more, and that sharing doesn't disadvantage me. In fact, it makes me a stronger person. So I work as an independent inclusion consultant. I work with organisations to help them create environments where their employees, customers and service users can be their authentic selves, and to feel respected and that they belong. I'm fortunate that I engage with customers across a wide variety of different market sectors and communities, from technology to theatre, from food waste to heritage, arts and design and more. And although these companies are very different in terms of sizes and types, there are always common threads. So I help them to explore things like establishing and nurturing the basics of humanity through fostering respect, a true sense of belonging and authenticity in one's identity, and through sharing experiences and respecting opinions, even when they're very different to one's own, and capitalising on what we have in common. These help these organisations to grow and be better places to work at and engage with. Through my link to a consortium called Embed, which is a consortium of independent consultants who specialise in inclusion, I get to work with some great people. This includes somebody called Becky Morris, who I wanted to mention. She's the creator of Disability Collaborative Network, which is very active in the heritage sector. So if you're not already aware of that, I would suggest that you search them online. Becky has a great deal of experience in neurodiversity in particular, and in the heritage sector, and she kindly introduced me to Mara for today. In terms of other interests that I've got, I volunteer for a major international arts festival. So I help with everything from back of house to technical rehearsals and some performance. And I'd say I'm enthusiastic, but most definitely an amateur. I'm also a facilitator for Diversity Role Models, which is a charity delivering interactive sessions to students to combat homophobia, biphobia and transphobia in schools. And lastly, I'm a community steering group member for the UK's first purpose-built LGBT affirmative extra care housing development. Quite a mouthful, I'm afraid. This is being built in Manchester at the moment. And this will not only address the unique needs of older LGBT people, but it will also ensure that we respond to a variety of impairments and to be dementia friendly as people grow older. Clearly, there will need to be a need to ensure that the spaces that we create within the environment are fully accessible to disabled residents and visitors. So as an access auditor, my experience in that field comes in handy. I'm very much looking forward to sharing this evening and also to learning. Thank you very much, Mara.
Thank you, Martin. I can't wait to hear more of your insights as the discussion continues. Next, we will have Richard Sandell. If you're ready, I'm just going to pop the PowerPoint up on the screen. There we go. Do write in the chat if you have trouble seeing the PowerPoint, but otherwise, take it away, Richard, and let me know when you want me to change the slides.
That's brilliant. There's some earlier slides. If you could just go back to the first slide, that'd be brilliant. It's got maybe 2 or 3 images. That's the first one. Brilliant. Thanks so much for having me here, Mara, and colleagues for the invitation. And it's brilliant to hear more from Martin and Lady Kit to come. So just a few images to support me in saying a little bit about my work and my interest, my background, where this all comes together. The image on the top left is Nottingham Castle Museum and Art Gallery. I used to work there over 25 years ago, and one of the projects I did, as you can see, then the museum there is on the top of a very steep hill. It's a Grade 1 listed building. It's built as a scheduled ancient monument. So all sorts of kind of classic historic building constraints. And back in the mid-90s, with my colleague, we set up what I think is the UK's first disability consultative group for museums. That's the image on the right, a group of local disabled people who we paid as consultants to help us as we went through a major redevelopment of that whole site. So we put this group of people in a position of power to be able to advise on and put all of our plans for new gallery developments through them. And I learned a huge amount from that project about placing that power dynamics, but also placing disabled people's lived experience at the heart of projects and what can happen when we do that. Interestingly, that group said to us within just a few weeks of being established, we'll help you make this place accessible, but what will we find when we get inside? Where will the stories of disability be? And that set me on a kind of path of research, which I'll share a little bit about in a second. The image at the bottom is just, it's the first LGBTQ object which I was actively involved in this case, acquiring and interpreting in that very same museum. And it really struck me when I got Mara's invitation that I very often get up and talk about either work around disability or LGBTQ, and rarely do those things come together. So this kind of anchors perhaps both my twin interests in that early work 25 years ago. And next slide, please, Mara. In terms of work around queer heritage, a number of projects, perhaps one of the biggest I've been involved with would be Prejudice and Pride. We were the research partner for the National Trust's National Public Programme around queer history back in 2017. The image on the left is a historic house, Kingston Lacey, where we staged some major research-led interpretation and public engagement work. The image on the right is artist, performer, art historian David McCalman, who I had the opportunity to collaborate with as we queered a number of the trusts, National Trust's historic houses. Next slide, please. These two images are from the installations we developed as, inside that historic house, Kingston Lacey. The image on the left is a series of 51 knotted ropes. It's a memorial space to the 51 men who were executed for same-sex relationships during the lifetime of the owner of that house. The image on the right is a projection. So you can see 3 windows. The actual middle one, the shutters are closed on that window, and we've projected a view on it out into the park, but also projected the voices of contemporary LGBTQ people who were displaced as a result of intolerance, tying in with the history of this house in a kind of dance between the historic and contemporary. Next slide, please. In terms of my work around disability, worked collaboratively, always putting disabled artists, activists, researchers at the heart of our projects. A couple of the ones I could highlight on the left is Matt Fraser, who we got the chance to work with to create new narratives of disability in medical museums. He created an extraordinary performance called Cabinet of Curiosities, How Disability Was Kept in a Box, which was also later performed in those museums and as a keynote at the Museums Association. It's all available online on our Research Centre for Museums and Galleries website. I can pop the link in later. The image on the right is from one of my favourite projects. We had a chance to collaborate with Deaf Men Dancing, who used contemporary dance to interrogate different museums' collections and to invite audiences to have a greater understanding of deaf history. Next slide, please, Mara. A lot of the work I've done on disability over a period of about 20, 25 years culminated quite recently in a research collaboration with the Wellcome Collection, who we were approached with a very tantalising offer to collaborate with them on the creation of a new permanent gallery. This is it. It opened in September 2019. It's called Being Human, and it's at the Wellcome Collection. You'll be able to get back in there again if you haven't seen it before. It was closed in lockdown. Next slide, please. A really important project for us. The image on the left is a visitor going round the galleries. The image on the right is a headline from the New York Times, which asked, is this the world's most accessible museum? And it's always a little bit of a sort of double-edged sword, that, in a sense, because I'm enormously proud of what was achieved in terms of access and a kind of radical reframing of difference and disability within that space. But of course, nothing's perfect, and there are always things you could do differently. But nevertheless, I learned a huge amount about how we could bring together access and inclusion in that space. Next slide, please. I think it's probably my last slide, and it's just to say, as we focused a lot on the narrative, so we worked collaboratively to identify objects and artworks and put disabled people's work perspectives at the heart of interpreting those objects. But we also got involved in access, and this is just one of my favourite images, because we're all used to going to art galleries where you see the artworks, video works on a screen, and you have a bench perfectly aligned centrally in front of it. And one of the people we worked with, Tony Heaton, brilliant artist and activist, and his wheelchair user, and he said, that really winds me up that we're always, people who visit in wheelchairs are always pushed to the margins. They never get to occupy that optimal position because of these centrally placed benches. And so the designers and the curators simply moved the bench along, breaking the conventions of many display spaces, but here allowing wheelchair users to occupy that prime position along with their non-disabled visiting friends. It's a subtle cue, but actually a very powerful one for conveying how public spaces don't need to always position disabled people as second-class citizens. They can find ways to create spaces that are much, much more equitable. Okay, I think that's it from me. Back to you, Mara.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, I'm so excited about all these projects and looking forward to talking about them more throughout the discussion, particularly the Wellcome Collection, actually. But now it is time for Kit to join us. I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint for Kit. So you can start talking whilst I sort that out, if you like.
Hiya, I'm Kit. My pronouns are they, them. I am a white person with a shaved head and quite a smiley face. I'm a socially engaged artist, but I'm a socially engaged artist who's a bit uncomfortable about that term. And I guess, there's quite a lot of cultural baggage, isn't there, around being called an artist and what that means. And there's still quite a lot of ideas floating around about that being sort of lonely, tortured genius man artist somewhere in a freezing garret. And that just seems like quite a rarefied, kind of inaccessible idea of what an artist might be. Yeah, so when I talk about being an artist, I guess I prefer not really to talk about to be called an artist, but more to think about like the process of what that is. So the work that I do is really collaborative, and it's also really messy, and I'm really interested in how we value mess, and I call the kind of processes that I use mess making as social glue. So I'm dead interested in how can you use awkwardness and uncomfortableness and like the grainy edges of stuff, and vulnerability and ideas of failure. How can you use all of that stuff to build really nuanced, sort of luscious relationships? And then once you've built those relationships, what can you do from that? What things can you achieve from that? And I'm sort of super curious about the role of creativity, and especially collaborative creativity, in doing those things. So over the last, I don't know, 3-4 years maybe, I've worked more and more in heritage spaces, and quite a lot of those projects, the initial aim of the heritage organisation or the museum or whatever, is to maybe find some silences in a museum or in an archive, maybe to engage some audiences who haven't engaged before. And through doing that, these organisations and these spaces often find that the processes and procedures they have within their organisation are not really fit for purpose, and they're not actually working as vehicles for inviting people in and for welcoming people and making them feel comfortable and valued. And I sort of noticed this happening with a couple of projects and thought, oh, that's interesting, isn't it? And then I thought, oh, I shouldn't just be thinking, oh, that's interesting, I should really be doing something with this. So from those experiences, I started to develop some research into how we can use socially engaged methodologies, how we can use participatory art and collaborative making as a way of really digging into and investigating and changing organisational policies and structures and procedures. So over the last 6 months, I've been doing an Arts Council England funded project, which has been really specifically looking at that. And that research project was looking at LGBTQIA communities. And from that project, I'm now working on an AHRC funded project, which is specifically looking at disability access and how we can use those socially engaged collaborative creativity processes to make venues and spaces more accessible. So I've chatted a lot about kind of process there, and that's really super important to me. I'm dead interested in it. But the projects that I do often do have physical object outcomes and events as well. And for anybody who's been watching the slides, some of those have pictures of some sculptures that have been made and some workshops that have been run and stuff like that. And I guess to finish off, I'd just very quickly tell you about two of my favourite kind of creative outcomes. I don't really like that phrase, but we'll use it. And one of them is a giant origami boat race. So that project was bringing a community group together to make enormous origami, bright pink origami boats, and then have a great big huge boat race down the local river. And another one of those projects is called Small But Fierce, and that is an international feminist art magazine for and by children. I think that's everything I've got to say. Thanks, Mara.
Great, thank you so much. I will just get the PowerPoint off, start my video. So if we could get our panelists all on the video, with the videos on, sorry, and then we can sort of delve into the discussion after I introduce myself quickly, and then I might kind of answer the first question to get us all warmed up and started. So I am Mara Gold. I was the researcher on the Beyond the Binary project. So my role was kind of to look at the collections and the objects that already existed in the museum and to see if we could tell LGBTQ stories from those. It turns out there were a lot of them. And I think it's, you know, part of my process, I guess, was that I kind of, rather than sort of imposing queerness on the objects or in collections or trying to say, you know, this is a queer object, I really was interested in using the objects to kind of spark stories and tell stories, particularly stories connected both to kind of mythology, folklore, traditional kind of oral histories, that sort of thing, and then to kind of connect that to kind of modern or contemporary activism, which I got very, very excited about and came back with this huge list that I don't think they were expecting quite so many things. And then this list was then sort of taken to the community curators, who were, you know, the essential kind of part of this project. And they were kind of members of the community that obviously were interested in writing about some objects, contributing some objects of their own. Important to note that they were paid for this work. This wasn't voluntary work. I think that's something, you know, very important that I hope to talk about more in this discussion about kind of, you know, paying marginalized people for their labor, as a lot of institutions kind of get away with getting that for free. And so, yeah, so I loved kind of working with community curators, and then this kind of exhibition, not only the exhibition came out of it, but then also working on some kind of interventions in the main galleries. And I also had some kind of quite a lot of conversations with kind of Indigenous artists from various places around the world. I worked particularly kind of on Aotearoa, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, because I am from New Zealand myself, so I had some background in that. And yeah, so that's kind of a very quick rundown of what I did within the project, but there was, of course, a lot more involved, and hopefully you'll come along and see it. I also have worked, so I've worked in both arts and heritage. I used to work in theatre and also did my master's in theatre. So I do have kind of some of that arts experience, although I have dropped it slightly towards the heritage side of things, but I'm hoping to combine those a bit more, particularly in terms of looking at disability, because I have quite a lot of experience of kind of sort of doing theatre workshops and things with teenagers and adults, you know, well, disabled teenagers and adults, as well as LGBTQ teenagers, and sort of doing workshops to help understand and develop your kind of identity. So I'm quite into that. I am disabled, chronically ill myself. That's also something I want to talk about, is kind of including chronic illness within kind of, you know, umbrella of disability, and in terms of making adjustments. I'm autistic as well. And I am also queer. So I guess I'm kind of at that intersection, and a lot of us in the community are really at that kind of intersection between the two. So I think that's probably enough about me. I will get the discussion started, and I wanted to kind of start on a oh, also, sorry, Kit, I forgot to say, I loved what you're saying about kind of mess and awkwardness and kind of sitting with that. And we had a comment from Kyle, who said, well, what are museums if not a carefully curated mess of things which we navigate and curate? I imagine it could create quite a luscious relationship indeed. So yeah, that is great, and it's, you know, it is true. And I kind of feel like when I was working on the Beyond the Binary project, that was something I was doing, is kind of sorting through this mess of things to find objects that we can, you know, hone in on and focus on. So yeah, so I wanted to start with this with a more positive side of things and talk about, you know, what we think arts and heritage spaces and organizations are doing well, and then we can move on and talk about, you know, what needs to be done and all the things that are going wrong. So I kind of wanted to start with a few things that I thought, you know, I think places are doing well. I will start with the pit rivers. Don't worry, they're not paying me to do this. In terms of, not necessarily in terms of, you know, representation, I think that can be increased, and it's definitely going to be, and that's kind of something that we, you know, sort of spoken about for future projects. So I'm really keen on doing that, but they have been really amazing, as I said, in terms of, you know, community curators on the project and sort of paying people for their involvement. And that's really important, I think, for the queer and the disabled community. And also on a kind of a personal note, it was one of the first place I think I actually felt supported in terms of, you know, having to rearrange, you know, meetings or having strange hours. You know, it's just those kind of small things that made me feel like I was actually kind of supported and wanted at the museum, rather than, you know, seen as this kind of annoying person that's flaky or whatever, because, you know, a lot of organizations don't understand chronic illness. So I really want to commend the Pit Rivers first on that. And I also want to talk about another place that I worked for, which is the Albany Theatre in Deptford in London. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with them, but there's this amazing centre where there's a main theatre, kind of cafe space, and a bunch of charities within the building. They do, you know, really great work on all kinds of accessibility, really. One of the kind of main partners within the building is called Heart and Soul, and they work specifically with youth and adults with learning disabilities. They have this amazing arts festival club night thing called Squids Club, which I was involved with when I was working there, and it was the most joyful thing I have ever been to in my life. It was beautiful. The whole building was taken over. They had you know, main stage with performances, dancing, all that sort of thing, DJs. They had an open mic night room, a video game room, a quiet room, everything you could possibly imagine. And I've never seen so many happy people. So I really want to kind of talk about events like that, which I think are super important. Because, you know, they don't, a lot of, you know, people, particularly this age group, which is was kind of preteens to 25, I think, you know, don't have that space to really kind of express their joy and perform, and you know, so I'm rambling about it now because it's so wonderful. So please do check Heart and Soul out, because they're pretty great. And then I just wanted to mention one thing, a kind of a moment that really struck me in terms of museum representation. In that, so obviously when I travel, all I want to do is visit the museums. So I was doing one of my museum days in Ljubljana in Slovenia, which is where half of my family are from, actually. And in the museum, I don't know what it was. I wasn't expecting it, but I just walked into this room, and one of the kind of highlighted pieces in the kind of main gallery of the permanent collections was this beautifully decorated kind of wheelchair, and you know, beautifully lighted, and and I got really emotional when I kind of walked in and saw that, because it's not something I'm used to seeing kind of in the sort of main space of a museum. And I had this, you know, the write-up about it, it was a very personal one about the owner of the chair, rather than kind of, you know, pathologizing disability. So this lovely write-up about the owner, who's a guy named Zois, who was a mineralogist and collected a bunch of things for museums himself. And he, you know, kind of, he was really proud of his chair, and he kind of decorated it on these beautiful designs. This is from the 19th century. And yeah, that I think is just such a memorable moment for me, because that's, yeah, I just hadn't seen it, you know, disability or, you know, even a mobility aids kind of displayed in this way as a piece of art. So enough from me. I would love to hear from our panelists of any, you know, places, organizations, or even, you know, events, whatever you want, that you think are doing a good job, at least in terms of either access or representation. Martin, yes.
So I think those things that you said sound really inspiring, and it's really good to hear. And I think when you go and visit a space and you see something like that unexpected and it touches you, it's just the most amazing feeling, is it? Because you feel validated, and I think that's really valuable. I mentioned earlier on that I'm engaging with an international arts festival, so it's Manchester International Festival, and it's really up in its game for accessibility, despite some of the challenges that it has. So it tends to find unusual spaces in which to put performances on, and so of course naturally those present huge logistical challenges, but it always finds a way of being able to overcome these things, and I think that's really, really encouraging. I also had the good fortune to work providing consultancy and some training to a theatre recently, and that theatre I found very inspiring because it has a huge amount of community outreach to socially disadvantaged and excluded people, to young people, to disabled young people, and I think it's really encouraging to see that because it's clearly placing itself at the heart of the community.
Yeah, exactly. I just found a comment on the chat that I thought I'd read out. So Joe says, what Mara just said about the museum making accommodations for her, that is also a huge issue. If we want to make museums more accessible to disabled visitors, we have to make sure disabled professionals can work in museums to make that happen. But many disabled people are having a hard time finding a job because of all kinds of different hurdles that able-bodied people don't face. And thus, this is exactly one of the points that I would love to discuss in more detail shortly, because that is, that's like, I think, key for me in terms of, this whole issue. But before we can move on, does anyone else want to comment on any organizations, places? Oh, Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I mentioned Welcome Collection because we had the chance to sort of work there, and I think there are many features of that organisation which I think there are lessons to learn from. Probably the biggest thing I think was moving away from engagement or consultation with disabled people as a kind of one-off moment towards sort of mass and multiple conversations in order to bring about genuine transformation. So it's that sustained level of dialogue and engagement, and so also not siloed or boundaries. So it wasn't just about access or just about representation. It was understood from a kind of embodied visitor viewpoint, really. And it started with the challenge of sort of recognition that many disabled people hate medical museums and have a very difficult relationship with them, not because it's close to their own lives, but because their lives are held up as, as curiosities to be kind of gawped at or seen as less than human. So taking that as a starting point and saying, what will it take to entirely turn that around, led to this kind of program of sustained dialogue and a real openness, I think, to where it would go. I loved it when you said Heart and Soul, Maura, because Heart and Soul were upstairs in what's called the hub at the Welcome.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So there was a kind of bleed between the work we were doing and learning from what Heart and Soul were doing. And one of the things I really loved is that the sort of Welcome gave them the opportunity to kind of remodel their spaces, for example, to suit them. And they did a kind of sort of hack on these kind of glass and steel hard spaces and changed them around so that they were more suitable and workable for themselves. But they also let that be visible in the organization. So you got, as a visitor, you would know that Heart and Soul were upstairs and what they were doing and what they stood for. And that sort of full, rich, embodied engagement with it, rather than something that's bolted in, felt like something really significant.
Yeah, I mean, I know all the, the Welcome Collection does, have quite a lot of funding behind them, but that just goes to show that you can change the spaces. There's so many organizations, oh, well, they'll be too difficult, or it's permanent, it's stuck like this, all that sort of thing. But actually, you can. Maybe you need a bit of money to do it, but you can. And I actually wanted to, kind of continue what you're saying a little bit about the Welcome Collection, because, I think, a while ago, that was kind of one of those places that people sort of went to for the kind of gore, shock factor, kind of what you were saying about medical museums. And that's a brilliant example of really kind of turning their practice around from kind of the sort of pathologizing view into making it sort of a more, personal view, and looking at these people, us disabled people as people, rather than just like, ooh, a horrific object to look at. So yeah, I do want to commend them. And also I should say to people that their library is an amazing resource, and anyone can join, and there's lots of medical stuff on there if you're obviously interested in that, but also stuff for LGBTQ research, like London Illustrated News, all that sort of thing. So it is worth joining. You don't have to be associated with an institution. Kit, did you have anything to sort of add to this? Or?
Yeah, just a general kind of celebration of Dance City in Newcastle, because I think they just get so much right. And you walk into their space and it's just dead easy to get into. Like, it's really open and everyone there is super friendly. And as soon as you walk in, there's information everywhere about loads of different things. There are Makaton signs on the wall in the cafe, so you can order stuff by pointing if you want to. They have male, female and gender neutral toilets. They programme loads of work by disabled and LGBTQIA artists, and their call outs are really accessible for those artists as well. And I think it's really deeply sort of considered and thoughtful, the way that they approach making the space welcoming and making coming into this space this big exciting invitation, and it feels really warm and lovely and you want to get involved. And I think that's really important and beautiful.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Cool. I'm just going to read out a couple of comments and then we'll move on to sort of the next, I guess, topic of the discussion. So Kyle says, the institution needs to be able to reflect and accommodate the very people it wants to engage with. As a disabled person, I've been passionate about museums since I was 10, and I've had the privilege of being able to work with large institutions. And this is something I've been really trying to advocate for. Richard's right, consultation and advice cannot be a limited or one-off thing. It has to be a constant, engaged, and supported. This isn't just true of the binaries of disability, but also gender, sexuality, and other identities. Institutions don't only need to give them access, but the means to actively make the changes they want to see in the places and spaces they care about, which is absolutely right. And you see that with a lot of LGBTQ projects as well. They'll do one thing, make a big song and dance about it. Oh, look, we did an LGBTQ thing. And then that, ends, and any relationships they had with volunteers or whatever, that ends. And, it's almost kind of, people can end up feeling used and all that sort of thing. And so, it is a constant thing. It's, society is constantly changing. So why wouldn't, the LGBTQ community or the disabled community as well? I'm just going to read one more comment and then we'll move on, because I think this is also a very important thing to note, which I had intended to mention but neglected to, from Alexandra, who says, if anyone doesn't know about the social model versus medical model of disability, it's well worth looking up to help understand how many disabled people's lived experience is largely shaped by the medical model. It was a real light bulb moment for me as a disabled person. So yeah, I think that's a really kind of great way of looking at it. It's certainly helped me in terms of how I was sort of coping with my diagnoses and things. In terms of, it's actually society that's disabling me. It's the society that's stopping me. It's not me. The problem's not with me. So I think that's really important to remember, especially for self-esteem as well. Cool. All right. So I'm just going to move on, and I would like to, and we've kind of been talking about this already, but just so we can talk about it explicitly, what do you think is essential to make a space accessible? Does anyone want to jump in with that one at all? Yeah, Richard, and then Kit.
I'll keep it really brief. I think one of the most important things is to genuinely try and move beyond a kind of culture of compliance, of minimum too many organisations still think, can we avoid falling foul of the law? Can we kind of meet those minimum access requirements? And they're incredibly basic. The bar does not go very high with that. And I think really working in ways that centre disabled people's experiences is the key to building that much more ambitious approach to go far beyond the minimum and really try and create. I love what you described, Kit, that kind of feeling of being genuinely a felt experience of being welcomed in the places that you highlighted as good. So it's not just something you have to dig out and see, have I been accommodated, but it's a thing, an assault. You feel it straight away. I actually feel really welcome here. I think that was fantastic.
Kit, did you have something you wanted to? I think you put your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I think for me, a big part of it is willingness to understand. I'm a parent. I've got 2 children, and in our family, I always say, "Do good listening. Are you doing good listening?" But I just think that's something that we could all think about ourselves, and that we could encourage like organisations and venues and spaces to think about, like, are you doing good listening? And if you're not, what are you doing to make that listening better? How are you helping yourselves to listen better? Because it's a real vital skill in all of life, but like especially when we're talking about stuff like this, it's super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think oftentimes with perfectly good intentions, organizations be like, oh, we want to do this for this particular community, but they don't actually ask the community what they want. It's just like, oh, here you go, and then maybe spend a bunch of money on something that's not entirely necessary. So I think that that is so important. Because and I think that's something with the Beyond the Binary project, we really were working with the community curators kind of about showing what the community wanted us to see about them, not not what we think that we should know about them, or what we've deemed to be appropriate. So I think that's really important. Martin, did you have something to add on this?
I think a significant barrier that many organisations have is the attitudinal problem. So it's the attitude and approach to actually sort of taking the actions to take some of these barriers and obstacles away. And I think if you can change the culture, some of these things can be difficult, and some of these things do cost money. Some of them are really easy to change, and it's just about changing people's opinions. And to come back to a point that Richard made earlier on as well, it's about normalizing this, so you make sure it's one of the steps that you always do right from the outset, because invariably if you have to retrofit something, it costs more money, it's more inconvenient, it tends to alienate the customers or the visitors that you're trying to make your space friendly and open and welcoming with. So I think the other thing for me in terms of accessibility, to build on that, really is about making people feel welcome and that you belong and matter. So it's about respect and inclusion.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. I wanted to kind of build on that a little bit. Well, what we were discussing now. I'm not sure, how much we'll have to say on this, but I wanted to see if you had any comments of anything maybe that specific for exhibition spaces, maybe versus events or performances. When you've kind of either of you, when you've sort of worked with organizations or spaces, is there anything that you kind of wished had been in place, either specifically for an event or for an exhibition, or that sort of thing? Wondered if anyone had anything to comment on that at all. All right, I'll sort of add something in there. I mean, I've mostly been working obviously with the exhibition Beyond the Binary exhibition, and other exhibitions. I've done a bit of work at the Ashmolean and things as well. And one key thing for me, which we are doing for the Beyond the Binary, is to have accessible kind of tours and options for things. So as I said, kind of BSL, audio described, quiet hours, that sort of thing. I think that's kind of really a bare minimum that institutions should be doing. You know, I think that really everyone should have a kind of, you know, a funding pot to, you know, to provide interpreters and that sort of thing. You know, it just really should be built in. So instead of kind of scrambling around, you know, trying to find people for this and that, you've actually got that one, you know, sort of area, or one part of the organization you can go to and be like, hey, we need this, provide it, essentially. Because yeah, I think that's missing a lot of places, you know, and there are, you know, a lot of restrictions for people that are not at that organizational level. So, you know, people from the community that are kind of working in arts and heritage spaces and things like that. And they just don't have the, you know, the funding or the money behind them to do things. So that really needs that. And so it's often these people that are the ones that are kind of pushing for this change, but actually they're not the ones with the resources. So I think, you know, organizations really, really need to, yeah, to think about that personally. Yeah, Kit.
Yeah, just that thing, Mara, that you said about budget and funding. For me, there are two things that are really important about having accessibility budget. And one of them is just having the cash. But then the other one is that most of the organisations that we're talking about, they work to this structure that is very much based on budget. So if you create an accessibility line in a budget, that is automatically space in the organisation to have conversations about what that means, even if that conversation is, oh, do you know what, for this team or this strand or this event, we don't need to use any of that budget. But it automatically gives a pause and a space to have that conversation in every single project or strand or team. And for me, that's like a really important thing about adding that accessibility budget. It's not just physically resourcing it, but it's like building it into the structures and systems of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. That couldn't be more important. I think, yeah. Richard, did you have something to add to that?
Well, I really like its point about making that visible, making space for that conversation to happen. There's, you know, the resource issue, doesn't it? It comes up all the time. And, you know, I'm really aware that Wellcome Collection is amongst the very best resourced organisation. And that definitely opened up sort of possibilities big time. But then I also think, you know, basically it was a big exhibition budget, but a portion of that, actually not the most massive portion, but a portion of that being dedicated to really fundamentally putting disabled people at the heart of it in terms of a process. And so that although organizations are strapped for cash, they're still doing exhibitions, they're still building things, they're still putting on events. So taking Kit's advice and thinking about sort of naturalizing that as whatever capacity is a really important one. And then I also look back at, say, with being human and think of two things that cost nothing and are really, really powerful. The one was moving that bench. It didn't cost anything more. You know, what cost was very beautifully designed furniture that was designed with different bodies in mind, but actually just bumping it along did not cost anything, and actually changes the experience for disabled visitors and changes the experience for non-disabled visitors who kind of are reading the space and saying, what's happening here? Whose life is it valued and is important? The other thing which cost nothing, and we had really rich discussions with the team at Wellcome about it, was the introductory panel. So everyone does an introductory panel. There's always a panel that says what the gallery is about and how it's come about. And in that, the text initially said something like, this gallery includes multiple viewpoints, medics, scientists, artists, activists, and disabled people. And that was great to make it visible. But we said, what would happen if you put, even though it's not a gallery about disability, because that's not the primary sort of theme, what would happen if in that list of contributors you put disabled people first? And then we were kind of going, that's a bit counterintuitive because it's about medical and science. So why wouldn't we list them all? But we actually asked, and they've put, this gallery is made by a range of people, disabled people, scientists, artists, activists, kind of troubling that hierarchy so that it's in so many ways symbolic and real. Non-normative bodies and minds aren't just bolted on, but maybe they're, for a while, they're at the heart of things, or they're treated equitably alongside other people. And those things didn't cost anything. But for me, they sort of speak volumes about an institutional commitment to doing something a bit different. And it is read by audiences as powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love what you said about, you know, this kind of message they're giving, like whose life is valued, because really that is at the heart of this. Without, you know, if you're going into a space and you don't see yourself represented, then you kind of wonder, well, what, you know, what's my value? Am I invisible? And that sort of takes me on to a comment in the chat that I'm going to read out about hidden disabilities. So Vibha says, Mara mentioned autism as well. What would you suggest museums should do to take into account what are called hidden disabilities? Also, I had a sneak peek of the exhibition on Monday and wondered about the backdrop sound of the video that is playing in the exhibition. Was that a deliberate choice? So the second question we might maybe need to ask Josie on, because I was not involved in that, but we'll see if she's happy to jump in or comment in the chat. But what I did want to talk about hidden disabilities. That was something I'd kind of hoped to bring up in the chat. And so, yeah, I think in terms of hidden disabilities, well, I think there's two sides of it in terms of visitor experience and also in terms of kind of worker experience. So in terms of visitor experience, I think there should, you know, always be quiet hours scheduled, and not just kind of one a month at like 8 in the morning, because that kind of often happens. And, you know, a lot of people like me with chronic illness are not up at 8 in the morning. So, you know, to actually have, you know, various times that work for people. And yes, even if you know, our kind of able-bodied visitors can't go into that space for a little while, okay, then maybe that's the way it has to be, because you know, we do have to you know, provide a welcoming experience, as Kit was saying, for everyone. So yeah, important to have those at different times. Kind of the bench thing that Rich was talking about, to have, you know, actual suitable seating around in galleries, you know, not just that one seat in the corner that the attendant or the guard sits in, but, you know, to make people actually feel more comfortable, you know, to even sort of like hang out in these spaces. I remember someone mentioning when the No Offense exhibition wasn't on tour, and the exhibition was it in, I can't remember, I want to say Nottingham, but I might be wrong. But anyway, they were saying that that exhibition, no offense, the touring exhibition from the British Museum on the LGBTQ histories, that became a hangout space for, you know, young LGBTQ people, because they didn't have anywhere else to hang out there. So to actually make those, because, you know, museums are for the people. So why not make it a comfortable place for people to be? You know, it doesn't mean that you going to a museum doesn't mean that you have to be on your feet marching around, you know, for 3 hours straight. You know, it's a place to have a nice experience. So I think that's important. I would love more museums to have kind of breakout sort of quiet spaces. I have to say, I don't want to mention she who must not be named, J.K. Rowling, but the Harry Potter studios, I just have to say this, they had an autism room there, and it was the greatest thing. I was just in this room, I went in there and I kind of got lost for a while. I was in this room like rocking on this chair, they had all this sensory stuff going on. So although we do not want to give money to them, you know, we that was actually a really great idea. I really enjoyed that. So, you know, having those kind of spaces, it doesn't have to be, you know, a huge space, just, you know, a tiny little, you know, a small room that, you know, you can just sort of get away from the crowds. Because, you know, I don't, you know, one of my things as an autistic person is, you know, I get really panicky in crowds. That's why I do not like events like Pride and that sort of thing, because it's like, whoa, sensory overload. So that's important. And I think in terms of, you know, actually working for these institutions, as I was kind of saying before, I think it's really important to have more provisions in place, like, flexible working. I'm hoping that this whole online situation not continues completely, because obviously, the in-person contact can be important. But for me, I've been able to do so much more in this past year than I have. I've been at home, but I've been able to do so much more than I ever have, because I've gone to, theatre shows, I've attended so many conferences, panels, all these things that I did not have the spoons for in life. Sorry, I should explain, if anyone is not familiar with spoon theory. It's kind of a theory that people with kind of chronic illness and other disabilities use to sort of allocate their energy and kind of understand how much kind of energy they're losing. So you can allocate, a certain number of spoons to a certain activity. So thought I'd explain that quickly. So yeah, I would love for this kind of more online content, or even to have kind of, if it's an in-person event, to then, screen it as a Facebook Live or something like that, have that kind of access. I think I said, yeah, more flexible working hours. And, I think just organizations just need to be kind of more understanding. I think a lot of places I've dealt with have, sort of been like, oh, well, are you better yet? When are you going to get better and go back to normal? It's like, well, I'm not going to, this is how I live. This is how I am. This is what I've got to deal with. And, there's just so many, it's causing me issues in terms of work, because one, it's hard to find work with that kind of hours that I need. And two, once you get the job, depending on how understanding and supportive they are, it might not work out. I've lost jobs because they wouldn't give me time off for surgery, for example. So yeah, ridiculous things. So anyway, moving on. I also wanted to note that hopefully this conversation is making change, because we had a comment from Catherine saying, I'm a fundraiser and I love the idea that there should be a core budget line for accessibility and not totally depending on outside funding. So yay, hopefully hopefully we've kind of got this idea into people's heads. All right. Oh, and someone says, Kyle says, Richard, I like that you point out the importance of putting disabled people first on the list of contributors. It does make a difference. And there is a very subtle but key difference between something disabled centered and disabled led. And yeah, that is really such a good point. And the same goes for kind of, LGBTQ. There's a huge difference between something about the LGBT community and something that's actually led, for and by the LGBTQ community as well. Someone, agrees. Hope museums continue to offer virtual programs and prioritize that as a larger line item on budgets. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to know if any of you had any thoughts about what you would like to see from organizations, either as an employee or a freelancer or a consultant, as Martin might have experience with. So yeah, any of you got anything to share on that? Martin, do you maybe have any comments on sort of coming into an organization as a consultant, like what kind of things that you might sort of, come in and say to them?
So is this in terms of improving their approach generally to inclusion with the disability and LGBTQ lens? So I think, obviously representation is really, really important. If you think about a prospective employee or somebody who's junior has joined an organisation, they're looking for where they might be able to progress in an organisation. So they're looking for people like them. And it's really inspiring when you see people that are like you, that are in positions of seniority. And that lived experience is so valuable that you get from those people that you just cannot get from other people. So I think that's really important. A culture of respect, and also asking people what they need for rather than making assumptions. It drives me mad when organizations make assumptions and do things to people. It's so easy to ask the question, what do you need to be able to be more productive? And I think with things like flexible working, I find a slight irony that we've been through a global pandemic and are still going through it. And it took that for some organizations to realize that employees could be incredibly or more productive working remotely, working more flexibly. Lots of disabled employees have benefited almost incidentally from having to have new IT equipment, but by its very nature, that's more accessible. And it's a real shame that it's taken something like that to have this happen, and we need to make sure that we capitalize on it.
Yeah, it is a shame, and because us in the chronically ill and disabled community have been asking for these things for years, and it's too difficult, but all of a sudden, as soon as it's happening to able-bodied people, they can do it. It's rather ridiculous. So we will be moving on to questions shortly, but I wanted to ask a little bit about, I just wanted to move on to kind of artists. I know, sorry Kit, you don't actually like that word, but I wanted to discuss if anyone has any, because I love seeing this kind of joyful representation of disability, and I wondered if anyone had any kind of favorite artists that they idolize or whatever. I'll start quickly. So one is quite an obvious one, but it's Frida Carlo, who was disabled and queer, and that her kind of disability played such an important role in kind of her work, often painting herself like, representations of chronic pain, wheelchairs, that sort of thing. And she had all this, she was painting a lot from bed, had all this kind of setup and equipment. And I just, I'm a huge fan. It's a huge inspiration to me. And I think, the V&A sort of did quite a good job at representing the disability, but other Frida Carlo exhibitions I've been to is just completely ignored. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And the other thing, the other kind of group actually who I adore, if we have time at the end, I'll show a little clip of them actually, is Drag Syndrome, which is a drag troupe of performers who have Down syndrome. They performed at the Pit Rivers, and honestly, just looking at the faces of the audience, like I had the joy on their faces, was so beautiful, and the performances were amazing, of course, as well. But the joy that they sort of brought was, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. So as I said, if we have time, I'll play a little clip. I love them, but check them out if you can. Maybe Kit has something to say on the artist side of things, perhaps.
A contemporary artist who I absolutely love, who's a craftsperson, but also takes that kind of the materiality of the things that she works with and turns it into performance, is Shawanda Corbett. And if anybody gets I'm not going to say loads and loads about her, but just go and check her work out, because it is just brilliant. It's so sort of like viscerally kind of exciting and interesting and visually engaging, but it's also so thoughtful, particularly about like human relationship to materials and to our environment. Really like stunning work. I'm totally in love with it.
Brilliant, thank you. Richard?
I'm sure lots of you know Jess Tom, Tourette's hero. I went to see Backstage in Biscuitland, which was an early performance she did at Battersea Art Centre. It was absolutely blow away, just completely amazing. Such a clever, inviting in and kind of revealing her lived experience, but in such a sort of politically incisive way. I loved it. And she's recently been co-programming with the programming team at Welcome. They did the Festival of Bodies and Minds, and they really opened my mind to a whole range of artists and performers who I'd not come across before. I was thinking Cheryl Martin did a performance called Alaska around mental health and race. She was absolutely just floored us all. It was incredible. You mentioned drag, Mara. There was a really funny visually impaired drag queen called Venetia Blind, who was just very, very funny and just brought everyone along and just had us all kind of howling there. Big fondness for, partly because we've worked with him, but then seeing someone like Matt Fraser's most recent work, you can see the project we did with him on our website, but I don't know if you caught Crypt Tales on BBC, and Matt had written and kind of curated this collection of monologues on BBC, which are really well worth watching if you get a chance to see them. Incredible body of work there.
Oh, and also speaking of that, everyone should watch Crip Camp on Netflix. Amazing documentary with both LGBTQ and disability representation in it, but be prepared to cry. Martin, did you have anything to add on that before we move on to questions?
Just very briefly, quite mainstream, Lost Voice guy. I thought it was great that he brought into mainstream and big audiences with this huge success on X Factor. And I love the way that he played his disability and his humour together on his own terms. That was fabulous, really worked for me. And something that's coming up that I'm really looking forward to as part of Manchester International Festival, which is happening in July. Christine Sun Kim, I've not come across her before, but she's a deaf artist that lives in Berlin, and she's coming to caption the city. So I thought it was quite apt, given that we're on Zoom and we have captions tonight. She's going to be wrapping supersized posters around buildings in Manchester to caption them. So I'm really looking forward to that. Wow,
that sounds incredible. Definitely have to check it out, well, at least in pictures, if not in person. Right, so we've run slightly over time because there's so much to say. I didn't even get through half of the questions and prompts that we had sort of planned on, but we better move on to questions. I'll just read a couple more comments here. Oh, Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong, is a book. This is Kyle saying this, sorry, is a book that I can definitely recommend. It's full of short essays and other written pieces from disabled artists, writers, thinkers, etc., from a wide variety of intersections. Whether you're disabled or no, it's a beautiful read. So yeah, I'm definitely going to check that one out. All right, I think it's time to check. Do we have any questions? I know that there's been kind of, quite a few comments and things going in the chat, but if anyone has any specific questions for our panelists, please pop them into the Q&A if you can, and I will just have a quick scroll into the chat box to see if there's any sort of questions and things that have popped out of the discussion. Someone's asked, okay, yeah, so someone's asked for sharing of links, which I think people have been doing. Let's see. Okay, can't see any specific questions there. I haven't seen any. Oh, maybe there's one popping up in the chat now. Okay, Andy's saying, I think we might be there, Mara. All the questions have been answered. Okay, well, that's good. All right, so maybe we'll just spend maybe 5 more minutes chatting, if that's all right. See if there's any other. Oh, yeah, actually, I do have a question for Kit specifically. I wondered if you had any sort of advice for disabled LGBTQ, sorry for using it again, but artists that you'd like to share.
Yeah, this is just for everyone though, really. But just find your tribe. And I think obviously for some of us that's more complicated than for other people, because for a lot of people their tribe is just like pottering around everywhere. But then maybe for some of it's a bit more complicated to find and connect with our tribes. But I think that's, like, for me, that's been the best, most important, most enlightening, enriching, wonderful thing, is to find people who I have sort of connections and mutual understandings and enthusiasms with. And I think part of that as well is about sort of understanding our capacity to be supported and to support. I think especially with being disabled, there's a lot of horrible narratives around being somebody who receives care and support and not necessarily someone who's able to offer that. And I think part of finding my tribe has been part of finding relationships that are sort of symbiotic and mutually supportive, and that's a really exciting, like, rich place to start working and thinking and being from.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. And Martin, I wondered, I was quite interested. How did you sort of get into the work you do? Is there a specific sort of training people need to do if they're sort of interested in kind of inclusion work?
Probably the University of Life is a good place to start, I would guess. Yeah, I think to do this sort of role, you need to have a passion. I have a very strong personal compass about doing right by other people, that everybody should have a space at the table. You know, I don't have an issue with waiting in turn. If it benefits somebody else, it's going to benefit me as well. So apart from that, I mean, I trained to be an access auditor, fortunately at the Welcome of all places. So I did it just before the exhibition that Richard was involved in took place, so I saw them preparing for it. But yeah, so I guess that experience, there are loads of different qualifications that you can take. There is no single universal standard. So I guess it's having an open mindset and the preparedness to learn. And I shall have taken lots away from this afternoon's discussion. So yeah.
Brilliant. Actually, all this mentioning the Welcome collection, it just reminded me when I was kind of looking, so I did start to look for kind of, you know, objects that we could tell stories about disability around. When I was working on the Beyond the Binary, that there weren't many, I couldn't at that time sort of find many that were at that kind of intersection. But when I was looking for those kinds of objects, I was really taken with this kind of collection of amulets that actually came from the Welcome collection. Some of them are in the temporary exhibition, but I thought they were quite an interesting catalogue of, because they were all, a lot of them were very sort of personal, made of quite strange things like cats' vaginas and things, dried ones, but you know, they were all for very kind of specific ailments and things like that. So I thought that was quite an interesting way to sort of learn about you know, how people viewed illness and disability in the past, and what, you know, what they were doing to, I guess, try and cure themselves or help them. So I don't like the word, well, I mean, the word cure is good in some instances, but in my case, I don't like using the word cured, because, you know, with chronic illness, it's so many people think there's a cure when there isn't necessarily. And then Richard, I just wanted to know if you had, I've had some glowing reviews by former students of yours. I know there's a couple in the audience. I just wondered if you maybe had any advice for LGBTQ and or disabled students that are interested in getting into museum studies, that sort of thing. Yeah, I just wondered if you had any tips or advice.
That's nice to hear. You know, it's a sort of amazing moment. There is more attention and interest in equity at the moment that, you know, we need, and more organizations are waking up to the need to have more diverse workforce and people that are sort of engaged in this work. So there are opportunities, and not sort of glossing over the challenges and the conservatism that still exists across the sector. You know, we keep coming back to perhaps a relatively small number of organisations that are really embodying the kind of change that we're looking for. But actually, you know, that lived experience is something that should be, and we need to get increasingly valued. So there are opportunities, I guess. You know, find organisations where you can make small changes and let them build and grow. So yeah, keep at it. Find the kind of organisations that could nurture and foster the sort of value your input. And as sort of Kit and Martin have alluded to, you know, like there are brilliant support networks out there. You know, Martin mentioned the Disability Collaborative Network. We've got you know, there's a new Queer Heritage and Collections Network that you can join. These places are free to join. You get your kind of peers and the support from not doing all of that on your own, and finding ways into sort of navigating in the sector.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. All All right, well, if nobody minds, I might just show, I'm going to show a short 40-second trailer to a little short film about drag syndrome, if that's all right. And then I'll pop the link in for you to, if you wanted to purchase the full film to watch it. So if you don't mind 1 second, I'm just going to screen share. Oh, we have Lady Kit's face there. All right, 2 seconds. Just trying to make it full screen, sorry. My window's gone all strange. Oh, there we go. All right, here we are.
Bring some champagne and bring some chromosome.
Soul sisters, let me hear your flow, sisters. Where's all my soul sisters?
Lady Marmalade.
Sisters, where's all my soul sisters?
What is my favorite thing in drag? I was born to dance.
So yes, hope you enjoyed that tantalizing sample. Please do check out the full doco, or they've got some other videos on YouTube as well. And I think that it is probably time to wrap up now. We did have a question about whether during lockdown this was an opportunity to sort of fix accessibility issues in museums and heritage arts venues, but as the answers show, probably not, because most people were furloughed, I think. So that's a real shame. But yeah, I really am hoping that this change in the way that we're working really will not only sort of continue, but maybe even expand and get people thinking about accessibility more, both in person and online, and including everybody. So that is my hope. I see Josie's popped back up on the screen. Did you have something you wanted to say or add? You are muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone so much. I've learned a lot just from watching the chat as well. So hearing you all share has been amazing. Our wonderful panelists, and just looking at the chat's been really helpful. And I think I definitely feel much more confident in advocating for an accessibility budget line on all exhibitions going forward. So it shouldn't be a big ask. It should be met with like, of course, why are we not doing this already? I'll say a little bit once you finish, Mari, but I'm just popping up ready to say thank you, really.
Yeah, I think that's why I just wanted to give a big virtual round of applause to our wonderful panelists, Martin York, Richard Sandell, and Lady Kit. Thank you so much for joining us. I wish we could talk forever. There's so much on this topic that I still yet to discuss. Maybe there'll be a part 2 sometime. But yeah, and I hope that everyone joining us also gain from the discussion, maybe learn some things, and hopefully take that back to your own organizations, places of study, that sort of thing, and really put sort of access and accessibility at the forefront, for disabled people, for chronically ill people, for hidden disabilities, and also access for LGBTQ people, because there are access barriers for us as well, even if you aren't disabled. So please, everyone, think about that. And I will pop the events links in the chat again now, in case anyone got disconnected and lost it. And if anyone's interested, you can also save the chat if there's some stuff in there that you didn't have time to write down. That might be a nice idea as well. So thank you, everyone. You're muted still.
Sorry, I've got there's 3 children in the next room who are going wild. They just had a lot of sugar, I think, for dinner. So it's probably good that I was on mute then. Goodness knows what's happening. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It was really interesting to hear from your experiences. The panel have all got such a wealth of knowledge, and also that many people are joining the chat was just fantastic. So our next event is Takatapui and Queer Pacifica, and it's on the 2nd of June, and that event will bring together an really incredible panel of Indigenous scholars, activists and artists to explore representation and decolonisation in museums and galleries. And you can book your place now via the museum's website. So as you're kind of getting the feel for, we're putting on lots of events at the moment for Beyond the Binary that are really thinking about how we can shift practice in museums and do that collaboratively with communities and scholars and activists and all anyone who will help us challenge how we work, basically. So thank you. And we